promise of safety, security, and environmental sustainability while competing globally. I'm Dennis Winkler, COO of Winkler Public Relations, and I have the honor to moderate this afternoon's petrochemical panel. This is the second petrochemical panel of the conference. And this panel, we're going to hear about growth in the Americas and growth in Texas, all based on global needs. So we're going to emphasize Gulf Coast Industry Forum and its reach globally. I'll direct you again to your programs for a complete bio, and I'll just introduce the speakers with a brief bio. So sitting to my immediate left is Bill Hammerstrom. Bill is Vice President of, Bill, do you say it as HYCO, H-Y-C-O? Okay, so it's HYCO Americas for Air Products, where he's responsible for the profitability and growth of the company's HYCO franchises and standalone plants in the Americas region. Although Bill has worked in Texas at least twice, 1995 to 2002, and then returned back to Texas in 2011, in those in-between years, he worked several global assignments for Air Products, either with their joint ventures or their franchises. One of those was in Thailand, another in the Netherlands, and finally in the United Kingdom. To his left is John Mabry, who is Operations Manager of the Gulf Coast Growth Venture Project for ExxonMobil Chemicals. John's current project is a $10 billion, let me say that again, a $10 billion ethylene plant in Corpus Christi. John is second generation Exxon, grew up in Baytown, and I understand is a friend of one of our earlier panelists, Baytown's own Roger Gunther from Port Houston. John, I should say, Roger, I should have asked you to give me some tidbits on John. But again, although he's got local roots, let me tell you that he also has considerable global experience. This Corpus Christi project will be his fourth major chemical plant startup in 3 different countries: Singapore, Saudi Arabia, and now the U.S. So let me open up the conversation. Bill and John, I'm just going to ask you, if you don't mind, if you'll just tell the audience a little bit about your company, its people, the plants and products, and your current role.
Well, I'll begin. First off, it's a pleasure to be here. I've attended this conference many years, and I'm honored to be a panelist. Just to begin, I'm the Vice President for HYCO for the Americas, and HYCO it really means hydrogen, CO, and syngas. I'll get to that in a minute. Raise of hands, who here knows what industrial gases are? Do you know? Well, if you don't know, don't feel bad. I've been with the company 30 years as of last week, and when I first joined, I wasn't sure what industrial gases are, but the air we breathe is comprised of oxygen, nitrogen, argon. What we compress and distill those air into those components, and we sell those. So those are examples of industrial gases. My business is HYCO, hydrogen, CO, syngas. We make that via natural gas here in the Gulf Coast area. We also produce and sell helium, and then we also sell equipment like LNG heat exchangers. Maybe to give you an example of how the products are used, so oxygen is used in steel mills. It's used at many chemical facilities here in the Gulf Coast. It's used at hospitals. Nitrogen is used at just about every chemical and refinery here for blanketing and inerting. Argon's used for welding. Helium's used in MRI. The hydrogen, which is one of our biggest products, is used at refineries for getting sulfur out of gasoline and diesel. So that gives you an example of what industrial gas is and how it's used. We provide those products by different means. So we have on-site plants where we could build at someone's facility, or we can build a plant and pipe it to you, and I'll get into some of our pipeline networks here in the Texas area and Louisiana. We also have a merchant business. We can liquefy products and haul it to our customers by tanker. And we also have cylinder gases that can be provided as well outside of the U.S. Air Products started in 1940, and we pioneered the sale of gas concept, which is basically a way to work towards building a plant for a customer. So Many years ago, with steel mills, we would ask them to enter into a 15-year contract for a minimum take over those 15 years. That was a financeable document. We would overbuild the plant and liquefy some of the other products that were made from that air separation unit and sell to the community. And the host site, who would be buying the base product, would get some value for that. So that is called the piggyback concept, and that is well known within the industrial gas world right now. We are based in 50 countries. We have 15,000 employees. Maybe just a little bit about our facilities and how we're set up here in the Gulf Coast. So our largest amount of investment is in the Gulf Coast. The biggest area is the hydrogen pipeline system. So in 1993, it was a very small business, but it grew significantly through the environmental regulations that required reducing sulfur in gasoline and diesel. And to get that out, you need hydrogen. And since 1993, we've grown significantly. We have the largest hydrogen pipeline network in the world. It starts at Pasadena, where we have a steam methane reformer, and then it extends to La Porte, where we have facilities, Baytown, Port Arthur, Lake Charles. And then in 2011, we physically connected the Texas system to the Louisiana system, and that system extends from Baton Rouge all the way down, connecting to every refinery, to Norco, across Lake Pontchartrain, and 2 refineries there. We also supply pipeline supply to oxygen, nitrogen, and CO and syngas here. And we have a very big presence in merchant gases. So there is a big distribution center at La Porte. We haul a lot of products to our customers there. And we also provide a service called nitrogen services, which is a way to help plant reaction turnarounds go faster. So our contracts are 3 to 20 years. So you could look at Air Products as the ultimate mutual fund, very balanced. We have 30 different industries we serve across the globe, various customers, various contracts. So it's a very steady business, and it grows at a low multiple of GDP. Last thing I'll say, you've heard earlier from Steve Byrne about consolidation in the industrial gas business. We will be soon the lone American-owned industrial gas company. We're very proud to be American and have such a big business here in the Gulf Coast. And that gives you a little bit of an overview of Air Products.
Yeah, so I'm with ExxonMobil Chemical, the division of Exxon Corporation. So if you just look at ExxonMobil Chemical on its own, it's one of the largest chemical companies in the world. We've got 11,000 people out of the corporation's 70,000. And we've got plants, about 30 some odd plants across the world in 6 different continents. We don't have anything in Antarctica yet, but hey, who knows? We've got a diverse range of products, everything from olefins to polyolefins, resins, solvents, synthetic rubber, and we touch virtually every sector in the modern economy, everything from automotive, packaging, of course, is a big area for our plastics industry, plastics product, industrial applications, consumer goods, so we're in appliances in a big way, and just again, every sector pretty much we touch. Earnings for the company, the chemical company, in 2017 was $4.5 billion. So of the total corporation, that's about a little over 25%. So about 15% of the employees make 25% of the earnings. So something to be said for that. It's just a real exciting time for our company. And as you've heard all throughout the day, tremendous growth in the region, but globally as well for our company. We are a part of the Grow the Gulf campaign that the corporation has launched. That's a 20-some-odd billion campaign over 10 years. And it'll have 11 different facilities that are in the works under study across Texas and Louisiana. And again, it's just a really exciting time for this particular project that I'm sure I'll get into more detail as we go through.
John, let me just follow up. You said 20 billion, 11 facilities over how many years?
10 years.
Hey, that's good news for our audience, isn't it? Okay, both of you have mentioned growth. Let me start, Bill, with you. Just recently, I guess in June, Air Products announced or had a ribbon cutting at Covestro's Baytown Industrial Park, 350 million world scale. I guess that was a steam methane reformer. Last week, the company announced, I guess it is an engineering study on another world class 30 tons a day liquid hydrogen plant. What's driving the growth regionally? What's driving the growth globally?
Sure. Well, I think over the last 2 days we've heard a theme, and that's around energy. And maybe just as an aside, I recall years ago when I was in Thailand, I had dinner with some executives, and this is 2004, and they said, a guy said, I just read this book, and they said oil's going to get to $100 a barrel. And at the time, oil was 30, and I was thinking, the world will come to an end. It's impossible. There's no way that's going to happen, right? And then fast forward later, when I was in Europe, natural gas in the U.S. was $10, $11 a MMBTU. And when I was in Europe, a lot of our focus in the European area was really in the Middle East. But my heart was really here in the Gulf Coast. And I was thinking, how are we going to survive that? Well, as we've all heard today, the gift and the innovation and the risk-taking here in the U.S. related to shale gas has really driven a lot of growth for all of us and Air Products, including what we've just talked about. So the plan at Covestro was driven by their needs for growth related to natural gas. Their flagship site in the U.S. is at Baytown. And I do recall last year, the site lead, Rod Herrick, was a panelist.
Yes, he was.
And we are very proud to be operating a steam methane reformer with a coal box for CO and hydrogen to meet their needs. They needed a very reliable supply. They needed someone who would be coordinated with their turnarounds, and we're connected to our CO pipeline system there. So that was really driven by a theme we've heard today, which is low natural gas, really enabling the chemical industry. The other announcement you mentioned was liquid hydrogen. So I have colleagues in the audience. They're very excited because the hydrogen network that we have, on the furthest eastern part of it, down in New Orleans, we have a liquid hydrogen facility that once upon a time would supply hydrogen for the space shuttle in Cape Canaveral. And we supply liquid to many different industries in the US, and that area has grown in part because of low natural gas. And so the team are now going to work to build a liquefier at La Porte, which is great for the local area here, more drivers, more people on that. From a global perspective, one thing I will share, so Air Products is #1 in over-the-fence hydrogen, and hydrogen is really, you start with primarily steam methane reformer that makes a syngas, hydrogen and CO, and then you can make all hydrogen out of that. We've recently announced that we've acquired the gasification technology of Shell. So for the coal-based feed to the gasification, we have 100% rights to that, and we have an alliance with them for liquid feed. So that's opened up a really big new area for us on syngas. So in China, as an example, we supply many large air separation units to folks who operate gasifiers. Now that we have the expertise with the Shell gasification technology, we've been taking over those gasifiers under long-term contracts, just like we do, as I mentioned, with the sale of gas concept. So we concluded one with a company called Luan. It's $1.3 billion for us. It's a joint venture, and it just came on stream this year, so that's very exciting. There's 2 other that have been announced there. And then separately, there's one that's recently will be announced in Saudi Arabia at Jazan, the largest industrial gas complex in the world. It's 75,000 tons a day of air separation capacity. Air Products has recently built for Saudi Aramco. That auction goes to gasification, and we have an MOU to take over that under a joint venture structure. It's a very, very big project. So it's just an example of how we're extending the syngas focus we have on hydrogen into gasification. And once again, it's all related to energy.
Well, Bill, before we leave that topic, let me ask locally, a project like you built at Covestro or like you're going to build at LaPorte, how many people would be involved in the construction of that?
Sure.
How many people would be involved in the operations of that later?
Right. So our business for the large plants is, for us, capital intensive, but not as labor intensive once it's built. So, there's take many teams of folks to construct that plant over 3 years, but there's probably 15 people at the Covestro site who run that plant. And here at the liquid hydrogen plant, it'll be a bolt-on to what we have, but there's going to be more folks and more drivers and the like there. The one thing that we can talk about later is, even though it's not very labor intensive, once you get going, you do have to do turnarounds, you do need contractors, and we can touch on that later.
Okay, super. John, I mentioned the Corpus Christi project, and I think I called it an ethylene plant, but it's not just an ethylene plant. It's a $10 billion project, and I'm hearing it's the largest in the world. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. It's 1.8 million tons per annum, which is 30% larger than the one we just built in Baytown on the North American Growth Project that literally just started up a few weeks ago. It is more than an ethylene plant. It's an ethylene plant and then 3 derivative units, so 2 polyethylene lines and a monoethylene glycol line, and all the infrastructure and logistics that goes along with that. We are a joint venture with SABIC. It's a 50-50 joint venture with SABIC, but it's a financial venture. ExxonMobil is the operator of the facility, and all the employees there are going to be employed by ExxonMobil. So these products, obviously everybody knows polyethylene, but as was expressed earlier, I think it was Steve Byrne, most of our product is going to be exported, and it's going to go into developing regions where people are literally coming out of the rural areas into the more developed cities, and they need goods, packaged goods, to improve their quality of life. So that's what our marketing research is telling us where the plays are. And as we've been talking about the theme, this is a natural gas shale revolution kind of a play in that region. So we will be getting our feedstock is ethane. It's an ethane cracker, so it'll be coming from Eagle Ford Shale in the Permian Basin. We're building pipelines to get that material to our plant. The location of this facility, as we've discussed, is Corpus Christi, but it's actually north of Corpus Christi, just on the other side of the bay, in 2 communities, Gregory, Portland. It's just west of Gregory and just north of Portland. It's on about 1,300 acres, and that's a big plot of land. The actual operating facility is only on about 300 of that. But we have a big greenfield area to work with. We'll have about 600 permanent positions that will come with this plant, and about 6,000 workforce during the construction period at peak. We estimate 3,500 indirect or induced jobs will come out of this venture. That's just all the suppliers and support services that we need to run a venture of this magnitude. And so it is a $10 billion venture, and we expect about $50 billion in economic stimulus over the first 6 years of the life of this project. As far as the status, we're still pretty early days on the venture. We have awarded contracts to our engineering and procurement and construction entities, and they are busily working on those details. In the meantime, the air permit is being worked through the process. You heard a little bit about that in the previous panel. The permitting process, that's in the works, and we expect to get that early to mid next year. And while that is in progress, we are preparing the site for the construction activity that's to come. So that's kind of where we are. And we're expecting a startup at the end of 2021, and we are already starting to hire people to train them and putting them in our existing facilities to get them ready to operate the Corpus plant.
John, again, let me follow up on that. You mentioned 6,000 workforce, contractors who will be there. when we think about the Houston Ship Channel, we're kind of used to that size, but not necessarily in Portland and Gregory. So what are you doing there so as not to overwhelm the community in the Corpus Christi area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we had some concerns very early on. We heard concerns voiced about the sheer numbers of workers we were talking about, and actually some of our original estimates were more in the 10,000 number. And we have we've reevaluated how we're doing some of the fabrication. We've taken a little more of the on-site hours off-site into fab yards, and we'll bring modules in for a lot of our equipment. So that reduces some of the burden on that community, the infrastructure on that community. But you know, there are some refineries and chemical plants in the area. So, and there are projects going on right now. There's a new Bay Bridge that's being built that has a lot of construction activity, and it looks like that will be winding down about the same time we're really ramping up. So there's some synergy there. But that was a concern, and we are sensitive to that. Still a large influx of workers, and we've been working very closely with that community to make sure we address their concerns with traffic and noise and dust and dirt and so forth. So something we're working at, something we're definitely sensitive to and concerned about and working with the community on.
Okay, and I know you have a good neighbor program. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit and talk about how you're doing it there and how we might apply it, you know, similarly here. But let me go ahead and jump to Bill. We talked about workforce. Our earlier workforce panel, you know, had a great discussion about workforce, mostly focused on what the industry needs, you know, as far as our process plants. You're bringing in 6,000, hundreds of contractors. What are we doing in workforce to make sure that we have the contractors to maintain and build?
So I think it's a good problem to have with all of the plants that are being built, and there's so many that have been announced and being built, but it is very hard to get contractors that are qualified and also will work with you safely, which is a big metric for all of our companies, right? So what we try to do is bring in contractors and make them feel that for sure it's going to be a safe environment. I think that's very important to the contractors to retain them. I don't think they want to be put in an environment where it's not safe. Also, I think you got to be very conscious that they're part of the process and how you're facilitating building the plant. And then lastly, you really do need to make sure you're close to the market, and you may have to create the incentives to keep them. You don't want to have the turnover as you go with that, but it's critically important to get the right team and to have them stick on the project as you go. And it's a challenge because there's a lot of competing projects across the Gulf Coast.
John, similar issue. How do you get the contractors for, you know, the 6,000 or so you're going to need?
Yeah, workforce, I agree with Bill. This is a great problem to have to try to resource these facilities. Early concern for us, we didn't know what we were going to find when we went to the Corpus area in terms of the construction workforce or the operations workforce that we would need to build. Now, having been in the community and in the area for over a year now, we've been really impressed with what we've seen. We get a little spoiled here in the Houston area with the programs, San Jack and Lee College. I had a wonderful breakfast this morning with some Lamar Institute students. I told them I'd give them a shout out. But we get spoiled with that, and I was concerned that we weren't going to find the same thing when we went to Corpus. And it's quite the contrary. Del Mar College has a tremendous program there. Really impressed with their faculty, facilities, and maybe there's been some discussions back and forth because it looked a lot like what I was familiar with at Lee College in San Jack. Craft Training Center as well. They for years been churning out craftsmen, skilled craftsmen. They need to do more of it to keep up with the growth. But also, as been mentioned earlier today, reaching back into the high schools and junior highs and getting curriculum made known to students as an option, as a viable option for very lucrative paying jobs. Our jobs are $80,000 to $90,000 a year for an operator. It doesn't need a 4-year degree. not everybody wants a four-year degree or needs a four-year degree. So to get more of that word out, whether it's a welder or a millwright or a process technology person, we want to encourage those as viable careers.
Both of you have had international experience. How does the crafts gap here compare to what you would have faced on your other projects internationally?
Well, it's hard for me to, there's nowhere it has been as much growth as we've seen in the Gulf Coast here. When I was in Thailand, I arrived right after the financial crisis, and it was picking up. It's a much smaller scale than what I've seen here. And then I was in Western Europe. So you have challenges, but on a much smaller scale. I think here it's much, much bigger. And maybe just to carry on with what John was saying, you've really worked well with the community colleges. We've really had to work locally here. We've created internships for the community college folks to come in to get a little bit of exposure for them and training for them, but then we get a chance to meet them. And it's been a wonderful feeder. And I think, as John mentioned, you can make a very good living working at a plant as an operator. And it's a very solid, you're working with very credible, viable companies, and you can grow within those jobs. So it's a great opportunity, and we've really partnered up with a lot of the local community colleges like Lee College and the like to do that. But from my personal experience, I haven't seen as much of an explosion of growth outside of the U.S. as I have here in the Gulf Coast.
John, similar?
Yeah, internationally, what I've seen, labor is so cheap in most of the places I've worked overseas. It's a bit of a different dynamic. Here, the skills are better, I would say, but prices are higher. So in Asia and the Middle East, companies tend to just throw large numbers of workers and to get a job done versus a skilled craftsman here. So the craftsmen here can attract a higher wage because they're higher skilled, and then it's just a matter of how do we keep up with that demand.
Just let me remind the audience, if you have questions, please write them up, hold your card up, and someone will pick it up and get it up here, and we'd like to ask your questions as well. Let me, I want to go back to the Good Neighbor program and the local business initiative. And I think I heard you say earlier, you guys identified a need in the community, and you put a program in place. Tell us about that program, and then I wanted to know, it's working there. Is it something we can model here, or was it modeled after something we have here?
A little bit of both, I would say, Dennis. Yeah, again, we ExxonMobil had been a little spoiled with what we have here. Working in Baytown, Beaumont, Baton Rouge, where we've had a 100-year presence, people just welcomed the next project with open arms, and that's what we've been doing for decades now. Is we've just been expanding those facilities, and what we found here, a little bit to our surprise, was not the welcome wagon that we had hoped for initially when we went and started talking to the community, dialoguing early 2017. It was more of a, we don't have generations of ExxonMobil people, and so you got to have to convince us that this is a good thing. And so we had dozens of community engagement meetings, and heard a lot of concerns, and it would be similar to here if there was an existing neighborhood community and then you wanted to build a plant a mile from it. A lot of you would imagine you would all have similar questions about how are you protecting my safety and health? How are you protecting the environment that I live in? Are you going to affect my quality of life? Are you going to hire local people, or are you going to ship in people from around the world? So those are the four major themes that we heard over and over and over, and we said we need to put together a comprehensive program that really addresses these questions and go back and figure out how we're going to solve some of these issues, and that's what we did. And as Dennis referred to, the Good Neighbor program is what we did. And I'll be honest with you, it's patterned after a lot of what we already do here, but we wrote it down and we played it back to them. This is what we hear. This is how we do it in other communities. We are not the evil empire. We will follow all environmental permitting practices and rules. We have OIMS safety programs. We're going to put air monitors in your community to prove to you that we are within the emissions requirements and anything that would be a threat to human health. We even are working with coastal bend bays and estuaries on some environmental initiatives. They want to help us with what types of trees to plant on our property and what type of grass to put to protect the wildlife habitat. So I'm a chemical engineer 30 years. I've never had to deal with what type of grass to put on a project. But so that's where we are. And so it's a little bit of a different community we've been in. That's just an example. Quality of life, people are worried about the property value, so we put a program in to protect the price. And then Dennis mentioned the local business initiative. Well, people want to know, are you coming in here, are you going to support the local businesses, or are you going to bring in people from everywhere else in the world? So we put an initiative together where people could register on our website, and by the way, that can be anyone in the room as well, GulfCoastGV.com. If you're interested in doing business with us, there's a way to register with us, and those are getting screened for safety and insurance type of information, and then it's being fed to all of our contractors for consideration. So you ask about what type of things can we do here that have been effective, and probably already are doing some of this. But one thing I've found particularly effective is the community advisory panel. It's representatives from our project and the community that get together on a monthly basis or quarterly basis and just talk about the project and talk about what concerns people are hearing from the community. It has elected officials. It has some of the police and fire officials on there, so they can talk about traffic and any other concerns that we have. That's been very effective, and that's a type of thing that we can do back here that I think would be well served. And I know there are some of those already in place.
Okay, before I go to Bill and ask him, 'cause I know you have similar community outreach. Let me just have you please repeat, because I think I saw people writing down, GulfCoastGV.com?
Yeah, GulfCoastGV.com. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if everybody who was trying to write that down, you got it again. Bill, tell us a little bit about your community outreach and sustainability.
I think John summed it up well. I think you really have to listen and build trust and give back to the communities. And it's both where you have existing facilities and where you're trying to build new as well. We have a foundation called the Air Products Foundation, which is the mechanism where we donate selectively to areas where we think can create value in our communities. When we had the Covestro ribbon cutting, we gave to 2 local charities. One was educational and one was environmental. Covestro also were a part of as well. So it was a way to partner with our existing customer in the community together. There's a lot of employee volunteerism in our communities. It's a way to give back, and it's a way to build a relationship and for folks to feel like, to build trust. Because when you operate, sometimes things will go wrong, and a relationship helps in those situations. And then, as John mentioned, if you're going into a new geography, there may be concerns, and you do have to put a lot of work up front carefully to get people to agree to that. One area for us, because our plants are not as big as a petrochemical plant, but we do extend pipelines to many areas. Sometimes we have to go through easements of private land. So that is another area where we have to go and carefully work through those areas and make sure people are comfortable with the products that are going through those areas as well.
Super. A couple questions from the audience. John, most of these are directed your way. So, and I think you've answered this a little bit, but clarify for us, what are you doing as far as making sure that the local citizens, Corpus Christi, Portland, Gregory, and Ingleside actually get the jobs? You know, what are you doing as far as training and educating those folks for the jobs?
Yeah, so we've already hired about 80 operators, and all the hiring was done in the Corpus Christi area. So that's number one, and they're now training in our facilities in Baytown, Mont Belvieu, and Beaumont. So that's one thing. The other is we have partnered with Del Mar, and we gave 17 scholarships to students last year. Been very impressed with the students we met with in the process technology program, and so we wanted to award scholarships to encourage them to stay in the program, with the intent that if they get through the program, then they come interview us with us. You know, so that's another way to stay in the local community. Local businesses, again, we've got site prep going on right now, which is about 200 to 300 people, and I think the last number I saw was 85% of all the businesses that are currently on site are local businesses. So we're trying to walk the talk of the Good Neighbor program. We said we would support local businesses, hire local, and we're just trying to go through and do what we said.
Yeah, thank you. And then one of the questions you had mentioned, modular building and bringing in. Is that a trend in the industry, or is that just because of the situation you were faced with in the Corpus Christi area?
I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah, we certainly have had a lot of experience with modularization in the upstream. So if you think about offshore platforms and what we do there, those are all modularized and then floated out to sea. And with the downturn or the drop in price of oil, we had a lot of projects that went or got shelved, and so all of a sudden a lot of upstream resources were available to come work on our downstream chemicals project, and guess what they brought with that? Some modularization concepts. So I think certainly for us it was a way to get efficiency and also to remove hours from the site to lessen the burden on the infrastructure in that community. I can't speak to how much of a trend it is in the rest of the industry, but I suspect it probably, when we look at some of the fab yards that we're looking to partner with, they seem to be pretty full.
Yeah. Bill, not necessarily the same scale, but are you facing similar issues?
Yeah, so I think it's a trend in the industry, more so because I think everyone has to be competitive to make these projects viable, and we're trying everything we can to be competitive. And so as you go into the project development, you'll look to see if modularization is the right way to go, and depending on where it is, we have brought in modules from China. We did a project in Canada where we built modules, but we built it locally. So it all depends on the project, but it does help in the end, I think, with the competitiveness.
Okay, we have a couple minutes left, and y'all were here or heard about the panel yesterday, and you know the question I'm going to ask. You talk about growth and expansion. Tell us what you're planning next. That's what everybody out there wants to know. Can you tell us that next project?
We'd have to kill you if we told you.
All right, I tried.
I mean, I could tell you, we like I said, we just started up a ethylene plant in Baytown at our olefins plant there, and along with that, polyethylene trains in Mont Belvieu. We're expanding our polyethylene unit in Beaumont and are working plans to progress an expansion in our Baton Rouge polypropylene area. There's another facility expansion in the works in Baytown, our job, and then there's another next step ethylene plant that's being considered as well somewhere along the Gulf Coast. So that's just in this region, and then we're looking outside in Asia, a couple different projects that are in the works over there as well. So a lot going on.
Well, again, with $20 billion, 11 facilities, I know everybody out there, there's work to get, so stay close to ExxonMobil. And the good news is when the industry builds, you guys have to build.
That's what I was going to say. We're going to supply all of his projects, so he's going to give me all the inside track. No, I'm only kidding.
I didn't want to tell him that the nitrogen we're bringing in wasn't from Air Products.
These guys in the audience want that business. So we obviously supply large refineries and chemical companies as like Exxon Chemical. We did we had a groundbreaking recently for a new facility in Geismar. It's going to be at the Huntsman facility, so that is off and running. We did commission this year a unit that recovers hydrogen from a propane dehydrogenation unit at Enterprise. There's a lot of activity in the chemical area, and that's where most of the growth for us we see in the HYCO and the atmospherics. So there's a lot of bidding activity. And the last thing I'll say, you heard earlier from Steve Byrne about the IMO regulations, which basically means the transportation, the maritime transportation fuel has to be lower in sulfur. The refineries have to, you're going to have to get the sulfur out of that. And the Gulf Coast refineries are set up already for that. So we would expect that there'd be an uptick in hydrogen for that. So not new projects, but would see more demand in that area. So it's a mix.
Very good. Well, I want to say thank you to both of you for coming and sharing. We're past our time, but I do have one more urgent question. And with Railroad Commissioner Ryan Sitton about to come up, this is an important question to you, John. Will A&M beat Bama this weekend?
27-point spread. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Thank you very much. Audience, please hand for him.